G'day guys, and today, without any real planning or research or any of that sort of stuff that I usually do, I want to go on a bit of a tangent to talk about environmentalism. Now, environmentalism is something I've discussed a little bit on the channel before. I've made a few videos on the subject, particularly in relation to the things that will help with the environmental problem that no one wants to talk about, namely immigration and government debt. What I want to do in this video today is ramble about, and potentially even embark on a purity spiral, about what I do not like about modern environmentalists. The modern environmentalist, as far as I can see, just based through my own observations, seems to be someone who thinks the solution to the environmental problem, climate change, pollution, and that sort of stuff, is going to come about through government action, regulation, legislation, and that sort of stuff. The great classic example is that they look at industry within the Western world, within countries such as Australia, US, UK, and that sort of stuff, and they say these industries are producing too much pollution. What we need to do is we need to regulate them to make sure they don't produce so much CO2 or anything like that. But the point is, well, the problem is, you get to the point where your regulation builds up, your legislation builds up, you restrict the free market so much that it becomes cheaper for these companies to just ship their industry overseas. Now that looks good on paper because you look at say Australia's emissions and you say, oh look, Australia's emissions have gone down 10% in the last 5 years or whatever. They're just made up numbers. But the thing is, the emissions aren't actually getting any better on a global scale because you take that industry from the Western nations, which have environmental protection, strict regulation, legislation, that sort of thing. You take it and you ship it over to, say, China, where they don't give so much of a rat's ass about the environment. And the problem actually gets worse because you've got the same factory operating, producing the same goods, but it's become more damaging to the environment because the Chinese don't give a shit if you pollute. And then to get those products from the factory to the consumer back here in Australia, well, you've got to ship them around the world. So the problem has actually gotten worse. You're producing more emissions, but you feel very good about yourself because you look at your country and you say, look, we've reduced emissions by this much. It's what's been referred to as a not in my backyard sort of solution. So you don't care about pollution, smog, the destruction of the environment as long as it doesn't occur in your country. Now this problem is, as far as I can see it, compounded by political correctness because, it's not considered very appropriate or wanted or even beneficial in any way, shape or form for white countries, white people to criticize non-whites. It's seen as racist and that sort of stuff, but that's obviously ridiculous because are we going to apply this standard evenly? Is it racist for any group or country to criticize another? And the answer is, of course, no, because they've got no problems with other countries criticizing Western countries. So that's the problem. You can't call out the Chinese for their polluting anymore, or anything the Chinese do really, because it's considered to be racist nowadays. Which is a problem, because, if we're going to let human niceties and this insistence on political correctness get in the way of protecting the environment, then we're not going to have an environment for very much longer. And again, holding to these people to their own standards, a lot of these people, or I don't know about a lot, but some of these people seem to think that the problem is going to come to a head very soon. The world is going to end in 12 years is the number I've heard. So it's like a big problem according to some of these people at least, but they're not willing to discuss certain things. It's like, holy fuck, we're going to die, but you're not willing to, explore every possible solution, and that's just, ridiculous. To me, that would sort of separate people who really think the world is going to end in 12 years, for example, or for those who don't. Because if you think you're going to die, you're going to do a lot of crazy stuff to ensure your own survival. Stuff that is clearly immoral. If you're up in an apartment building, for some reason you slip over a balcony and you're hanging over the edge of the balcony, you're not going to hesitate to kick in someone's window to save yourself. Even though that does initiate the use of force, you're not going to care at that point in time. So if we are at this truly, as a species, if we're at this truly desperate, trying time, then surely we're going to be kicking in a few windows. But no, these people aren't interested in metaphorically kicking in some windows and exploring every single possibility that could yield a positive result for the environment, namely the elimination of government debt, stopping industry from being shipped overseas to China because that's not very good for the environment, restricting immigration from the third world, and obviously building up the energy infrastructure of the third world. But you can't do these things, you can't talk about these things, and you can't actually propose something that might help the environment because political correctness does get in the way. Just imagine the headlines that would come out if, say, the Australian government started talking to Africa and saying, look, you need to do this, this, and this to reduce your environmental impact, it would be seen as racist, because we're in these very, hysterical, stretched, very thin like a guitar string under so much pressure times in terms of a culture. We're in a massive cultural moral panic where people are jumping at shadows and that sort of stuff, and it will collapse eventually, but how much damage is going to be done in the meantime? And this obviously goes beyond the environment, but that's just what we're focusing on today. How much damage will be done to the environment, possibly irreparable damage, because we're not willing to discuss certain things today, because we're too afraid to have these conversations, because we're too afraid to be called racist or sexist or any other buzzword that gets thrown around nowadays to the point where it is rendered almost meaningless. So that's really my big problem with modern environmentalists. They set up this huge standard of global terror, global threat, we're going to all die, and things are being done and it's terrible and we need to stop this and it's really desperate, things need to get done, things are coming to a head, and yet there's certain things they're just not willing to discuss because it makes them too uncomfortable. If the ideas of the non-mainstream environmentalist movement, people like me who propose restrictions on immigration and that sort of stuff, if that is so wrong, and that shouldn't be the thing that we do, you should be able to prove that. And it seems to me that you think you'll be able to prove this pretty easily, because people dismiss this out of hand very quickly, and it's not even something they think about. So obviously my idea must be incredibly wrong and flawed, and I just haven't seen it. It should be pretty easy for you to disprove me, but these people can't do that, which just shows that they're intellectually cowardly, which I cannot stand. If there is absolutely anything that we should not be cowardly towards, it's ensuring the sanctity of our own planet. Obviously, this is the only place that we're capable of living in at this moment on a large scale. You can jet off to Mars if you want on your own, but all the rest of us peasants will be left here. We shouldn't be cowardly in the defense of Mother Earth. So let's get out there and let's discuss those difficult topics that other people don't want to discuss because they're virtue-signaling morally superior cowards. Thanks all for sticking around, and have a good one.